and we shall get cracking with session 2 of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture on the burning issue of financing the transition, climate, nature and farm profitability. For those of you just tuning in online, my name is Rose O'Donovan, and I'll be moderating this session, which will run until around 10 to 1 this afternoon, when we will break for lunch. As we said earlier this morning at the top of the session, we will try to make this forum as interactive as possible, and a very warm welcome to those of you still with us online. If you scroll down the page underneath the picture where I'm appearing now, you can enter your question, and that will be transmitted to me here in the stadium. Now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce my distinguished panelists. First up, I would like to welcome Felipe Ortega Schlingmann, who is head of the Bioeconomy Division and Projects within the Projects Directorate of the European Investment Bank. Very nice to see you again, Felipe. Next up, we have Jean-Marc Peter Schmidt, who is MD for the corporate sector at the EBRD, that's the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Very warm welcome to you, Jean-Marc. Next, we have Morgan Deprez, who is Executive Director for International Finance, Economy and Nature Programs at the European Climate Foundation. Then we have, to my further right, we have Jörg Andreas Krüger, who is President of NABU, the Nature and Biodiversity Conservation Union, which is Germany's oldest, I believe 126 years. Is that right, Jörg Andreas?
Yes.
126 years, and the largest environmental association in Germany. And of course, NABU is one of the forum's strategic partners. And last but by no means least, at the very end of my panel, I would like to welcome Jürgen Tack, who is Secretary General of the European Landowners Organization, which of course is a forum founder. And if I've learned anything, ladies and gentlemen, over the past 4 years moderating this wonderful event, it is that Jürgen always has a trick or two up his sleeve. So please give my panelists a very warm round of applause. Now, we have a lot to get through, and I propose that we're going to go hard at this now for about 50 minutes. We won't go the full hour because that will eat into our lunchtime, and that will the afternoon session then will be a bit tricky to manage. So I'm going to go full on until, say, 10 to 1. So before we get cracking, just to talk you through the running order, each panelist on the podium will deliver an impulse statement of about 4 minutes. And I would ask you to stick to the timing. There's a countdown clock in front of you. This will then generate a broader discussion between myself and the panelists, and then open it up among yourselves. And then from around 20 to 1 or so, we can open up to the floor. So have your questions up your sleeves, ladies and gentlemen. As Stephen before me, there are roving microphones available, and we'll be able to moderate that discussion. So Felipe, let's start with you. I would invite you to take the floor and deliver your key message, and ask you to stick to the 4-minute allocation time. Take it away, Felipe.
Yes, thank you, Rose, for giving me the opportunity in the EIB to be here. Just as it is quite a relevant scene setter for the role of the EIB within the EU family. So we are the EU bank, so we are owned by the member states. We are a promotional bank that provides loan finance to viable investments that align with EU policies and EU integration. Just to give you an idea, last year we provided financing of around 90 billion euros and mobilized around 350 billion in estimation. Since 2020, we were asked by our member state, our shareholders, to champion the green transition and to promote the EU Green Deal policies. What this means in practice is that around 50% of the EIB finance targets green financing. We have exceeded this target, and last year we provided like 50 billion euros in amounts around 60% into financing this sector. So just let me highlight the alignment of the EIB with EU policies and the important role that agriculture and bioeconomy has always played since its inception in the EU policy framework. I would also like to highlight the success with this has happened, but in the last years we have got off track. There has been a lot of insatisfaction from several areas. So last year there was the strategic dialogue of the future of agriculture, to which the EIB also took part, and which led to a report where the EIB actually included an input as an annex on how we see our role in financing the transition in the agri-food systems towards the objectives that have been highlighted in the strategic vision of the European Commission, to which we fully align, and which highlights the importance of this sector to ensure and promote the long-term attractiveness of farming, its competitiveness, but to remain also sustainable within the boundaries of the planet. The EIB has sizable investments in agriculture. We finance around 5 billion euros along the agricultural, forest and fisheries value chains, and around 70% of this targets farmers. So just to highlight some of the elements that we highlighted in the strategic dialogue and which are product of our priority in agriculture and bioeconomy that has been highlighted in the strategic roadmap of the EIB for the next years, 24-27. Our plan highlights how we see ourselves as a public bank and the role of the EIB as a public bank. We see our additionality in complementing public finance resources, helping to address persistent investment gaps in the EU in those areas where activities can fully or partially sustain themselves. So we are a bank, we provide a loan finance that needs to be returned. But there are a number of areas where we see that we can, as public bank, act on market failures. And these areas providing liquidity, so act in financial facilitation, provide also direct loans to agribusiness and the public sector to finance enabling and productive rural infrastructure. There is a key element in the plan on reinforcing climate risk mitigation through adaptation finance, but also enhancing agri-insurance systems and emergency preparedness plans. And last but not least, there is an important area of leveraging on collaboration by leveraging public grant money and resources to provide innovative financing solutions. So we see there is an important opportunity and need to work together with the private sector, the public sector, in order to talk about results-based finance, for example, to targeted advisory for project preparation and capacity transfer in this area, and to develop and promote financial instruments and budgetary guarantees, for which we have quite some experience. Just let me highlight, I'm a bit off over time, but just to finish, that these instruments, financial instruments, are very powerful complementary policy delivery tools to pure grant financing. So there is a pure grant financing that should be delivered to activities that do not deliver returns. And then there is the whole spectrum of activities that deliver returns, but are subject to a number of market failures and investment weaknesses and needs that actually can be supported differently and through innovative ways, where public grants can be used as guarantees to address this financing. And there has been quite a lot of talk before on also creating a market in a business case for sustainability in agriculture. This is an important area of development where we need collaboration among different actors in the value chain, including the public sector, to make this happen and provide the relevant finance to this sector.
Thank you very much, Felipe. I think you've given a good overview there of the EU's bank, as you refer to it, the European Investment Bank. We'll be delving into some of those sort of details, particularly the financing gap that we find ourselves in from the agricultural point of view. But thank you, Felipe, for that. I would now call upon Jean-Marc to give your perspective from the EBRD. So take it away, Jean-Marc.
Thank you. Good morning, or rather good afternoon to everybody. So the EBRD is quite a similar development finance, impact-oriented investor with green as a core objective, but we really do focus on financing the private sector. Food and agribusiness is really a a core sector for us. We do finance about 2 billion euros a year in debt and equity from Central Europe to Central Asia, including North Africa and the Middle East. How do we do that? We work with various actors in the whole food value chain. And you will not be surprised if I'm saying it's easier to work with the aggregators, the traders, the processors, or maybe even the retailers, and have them act on their supply chain than it is to work with the farmers directly. Though we do that, but they tend to be at the very large end of the farming business. People with, big balance sheets, large farming surfaces, the kind you encounter in some of our countries, Ukraine in particular. What type of agriculture do we want to promote? Sustainable is the word, but we're not dogmatic about it's got to be organic or it's got to be regen agri. It can be conventional agri as well. We want to be safe. We want to see change towards more sustainability. I think the direction is radical, but the steps are incremental. And I think we need to keep an open mind on that. We talk a lot about environmental sustainability. We talk about preserving the soil, a key asset, but we also need to talk about financial and economic sustainability. And that is what is going to make the private sector want to take on that change. That is what is going to make the financing sector, not just multilateral development banks, but commercial banks, to want to finance the sector. And there, I still think we have a gap when we talk about change, when we talk about regen agri to the farming world. I think they still haven't, except perhaps a minority of them, they still haven't integrated that this is something that over time will pay off. The question they have is, what do I do with the risk I'm running in the meantime? How am I going to finance that transition? And there, I think, international financial institutions like ourselves or like the EIB, I think, have this unique ability to bring together not just the financing means, but to mobilize the right mix of incentive, risk-sharing instruments, to package that with technical assistance, because I think there's a lot of education and accompanying this change that needs to go on, as well as act as policy actors or policy advocacy with the various countries in which we operate to try and bring all of that together. The challenge is really not just what is the next deal we're going to do, but how do we bring scale in our joint ability to finance that transition.
On time. Well done, Jean-Marc. And I like your ending there about how can this all be scaled up, right? So maybe in the follow-up questions for round two, we'll delve into that a little bit more. But thank you very much indeed. Margot, now I turn to you from the European Climate Foundation. Looking forward to hearing your intervention. Take it away.
Thank you, Ro. Thank you for having the European Climate Foundation and for having me in this very distinguished panel. Very honored. So we are a philanthropy. We're not practitioners like the two previous speakers. So I will try maybe to give a few policy perspective, how we see things. I do have a special suite for financial regulation because I spent 20 years in a previous life in a central bank. So I care a lot about the financial, framework of things. I would like to make 3 quick points. The first thing is around this issue of transforming a sector. What we see is that there is no way you can transform a sector if you don't get the financial incentives right. The previous panel this morning, one speaker said farmers respond to policy, which is true. Markets will drive, market choices will drive the change, which is also true. But they can't do that if they don't have the right set of financial incentives in place, covering 2 aspects, the revenue side. So how can you give and reward behaviors which are aligned with the outcome you're looking for? But also from a risk perspective, because we know the lack of adaptation or the lack of transformation of the sectors is exposing the professionals of those sectors to risks, and from what we see, we don't seem to see any evidence of proper risk pricing of this. So I think the financial dimension should include the resource side and also the risk pricing side. The second point I wanted to make is around the levers you can use to do this. I'm not going to enter too much into details, but you have the public levers. Clearly, the cap is the usual suspect. It's been discussed this morning already. Problem is, it's already quite stretched. The fiscal space is not really there. There might be some conflicting priorities. So how do you design what you get in a way that you provide additionality to what the private sector can do, and you make sure that you drive the behaviors and the incentives in the way you want it. Here it's more a kind of design things. And it may make sense to take a look at what the British have done. They have left the EU, and because of that, they have left the cap, and they design, their incentives in a different way. So interesting to see what others have done elsewhere. And the third point is around financial innovation. It's clearly an area where, as you rightly said, Jean-Marc, we need scale. So if you need scale, you need to develop asset classes. So you need to standardize some financial instruments. So you need to create new things, new instruments, maybe something around securitization. I mean, there is clearly some policy space for things to happen, unless it could happen, but you need to have, as I said earlier, the right overall policy framework, the right tax financial incentives in place, and potentially as well the right involvement of various financial institutions. And I think I'll stop there for the first round.
Thank you. Well, you've still got a little bit of time, actually, Morgan, so I might just ask you just a quick follow-up. I understand that you're the founding head of the Central Banks and Supervisors Network for Greening the Financial Systems. That's a bit of a mouthful, but what does that entail exactly?
So it was something we created a few years ago, and we found out that there were systemic risks attached to climate change. And so climate change was not something peripheral that was outside the mandate of central banks or supervisors, but because it has some financial impact at the micro level, so at the level of banks and insurance companies, and also at the level of economies as a whole, it was part of the primary mandate of the core mandate of central banks. And so we created this network as a coalition of the willings, working together, exchanging tricks, exchanging the kind of techniques, the data we were using. And it was quite successful. Actually, when we started, we were like 8 members in 2017, and I think now they are 148 members worldwide. So it's an example of how you tackle a topic which may look like something peripheral at the beginning, but when you observe the various dimensions of it, you realize its core, and you realize that there's something you need to do, both on the incentive side and risk side.
Sure. Okay, and I liked your point there about recalibrating, I suppose, the policy instruments within that policy framework that we find ourselves in, which is constantly in a state of flux. We may need to rethink some of those instruments. So the perfect segue to yourself, Jörg Andreas from NABU. You're presenting, I suppose, the civil society organization. So take it away from the NABU perspective. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning from my side as well. We have heard in this morning a lot of fast changes, about dangerous changes and so on. And we are always asking ourselves, what is the orientation? What is the North Star to orientate for us? And the good news is, from my point of perspective, that we have it already. Last year, we had the final report of the strategic dialogue, and in Germany, we had a similar, comparable strategic dialogue as well, guided by Professor Strohschneider. And the good news is we came up to more or less the same results. So at the end, we know what we want to achieve. We are in principle agreeing about it. And that's nothing wrong now, because some external changes in the US or in Russia and at the global level has taken place since the reports has been published. That is something what gives us, I think, a lot of security and a lot of freedom for the next steps. The second important point from my side to highlight is we have it here in the title of the forum, of the conference today. We are talking about the change of the agri-food system. But in all the discussions, we are talking with 90% always about the supply, about the farming side. And my point is that we have here a very complex system. Farmers produce for markets, and not just for theory and concepts. And that means without changing food policy, consumption patterns, we will not achieve the change which we have to see in the food and agricultural system. That is crucial, since normally food policies are very controversial in the societies, and that is the reason for the fact that it's at the very early beginning that we have in European member states or at the European level the food policies developed until now. But coming back to finance, how do we finance the transition, the transformation of farming and food sector? And the first and the most important thing is really to bring together the key objectives of the European Union together with the budget. And I mean, you know, or I know that you're all familiar with the discussions about the last 10 or 20 years about reforming the CAP, having more result-based payments and all these things. And maybe this is our man on the moon moment, which we have to achieve for really progress in the next few years. But without these bringing that together, that would be just an unhonest politics. The CAP should focus more on key objectives, and that should more focus on effectiveness. And whenever we hear at the moment, and there is some discussion at the political level, which is really important to have in mind, we are talking about productivity, about competitiveness, and many other important things, but many of these actors are meaning direct payments and subsidies. And that is wrong. That is the wrong way. No entrepreneur, no business owner, and farmers are at the end business owner, will build up a business model on subsidies with a direct income support. For competitiveness, we need innovation, we need entrepreneurship, we need digitalization, and we need at the end for fair pricing, and we have heard that in the first panel, we need a kind of public payment for ecosystem services delivered by the farmers. And in addition to that, in the next future, the development of a good framework for payments from private sector with nature credits and all these things. We are really happy that the Commission had this now on the task list, and that we are looking for the discussions in the next 5 years.
Right on the nose there, Jörg, Andreas. I think Professor Strohschneider would be delighted to hear, he stood on this podium exactly 1 year ago. He'd be delighted to hear you describe the final report on the strategic dialogue as that North Star that we strive towards. So that's good news. A very quick follow-up with yourself, if you don't mind. One element that was mentioned in the final report on the strategic dialogue was the idea of the benchmarking system. Okay, and Felipe mentioned the strategic dialogue as well, and of course the European Board on Agri-Food that has now sort of succeeded that. What was your initial reaction when you sort of delve into the idea of the benchmarking system? Is that something that you support?
Yeah, I really love the idea, since, I mean, we have learned, at least from the farmer protest last year, that the bureaucratic system which has been taken on place on the farms is much too complex at the moment. I mean, farmers in Germany, they have to report to the European Union, they have to report to the federal government, they have to report to their state-level governments, and we need a better system, and we need a system based on benchmarks, so that you not have 3 or 4 or more controls on farm, that we need more digitalization, that we have more remote sensing controls, and there are standards there out in the world who are developed just for this. And to bring these standards in a model which can be accepted by the Court of Auditors and other level organizations here at the European level, that would be the task from my side. It is important to really reduce the bureaucracy.
And that's certainly feeding into that broader communication, or rather simplification agenda of the European Commission. Okay, Jürgen, you've been very patient. It's the moment we've been waiting for. I know you have a surprise up your sleeve. I can just tell by that cheeky grin of yours. So Jürgen Tack, European Landowners Organization, take it away.
Thank you, Rose. Well, I read in the instructions for the speakers specifically that we should not leave our chair. I'm not sure whether that was mentioned specifically for me or not. Okay, I will stay at least in my chair, but let's say we have more than 24 hours of sun in Brussels this week. That makes that automatically we have spring sales. And I've been able to do some good green deals this week. And what did I bring? Well, I have brought 6 samples of milled wheat coming from 6 different farms. The table is too small, but so what do I have over here? Well, from A, B, and C, that are what we call small farms. They are between 9 and 40 hectares. D, E, and F are coming from big farms. That is, in this case, there are farms between 1,000 and 2,000 hectares. Now, all of them are coming from members from ELO, so there's a reason that I'm not going to mention names so that I have no enemies by the end of the talk. Now, A and D are coming from conventional farming. Use of pesticides, use of herbicides, use of fertilizers. D, the big one, is investing heavily in high technology tractors, drones, digitalization, high precision agriculture. A conventional farm is not able to do so, and as it is just not making enough money to invest in this type of productivity. Now, B and E, they are both organic farms. Now, B is a 9-hectare farm. This is a 2,000-hectare farm. That's a big difference. Now, B is a farmer who was originally working at a nature conservancy agency here in Flanders. And he was driven to prove that working with nature was absolutely possible. So he started a farm, but let's say it took him 7 years, and then he returned in the end to the agency as he was just not able to make a living out of 9 hectares of organic farming. The one of 2000 had no problem with that. If we go to C and F, those are both regenerative farming. I would say that's the next level of farming, not making the system sustainable like organic farming, but really improving the land, including no-till, carbon storage, soil quality, and so on. C is a small one, F is bigger, so it's able to do that in a more efficient way due to, let's say, number of adequate and specialized equipment. Now, if we go and have a look at the market pricing, then I have to say, but B, our small organic farm, is having the best price per hectare. Let's say he's selling directly to customers in the neighborhood, so he's absolutely able to put a higher price. A, which is a conventional, D, which is a conventional, is the most cost-effective. Yeah, that's the reason that he's using drones and high-precision technology. Then we have F, which is a regenerative, and there we have a combination of cost effectivity and yield. And then the next in line, we go back to the other side, to the small conventional, which is fully yield-based. And after that, we have the small regenerative farm, where you have a combination of yield-based, but still very labor-intensive. And then on this side, we have the E, which is organic, which remains labor-intensive. There is special machinery, but the surplus on the price the B is getting almost disappeared because of the high qualities of organic material he's putting on the market. If we have a look at subsidies, then we see that the one doing best are on that side, that are the small farms, because they are getting most of the subsidies in function of the number of hectares they have. That's not the case for number B, because he returned to the nature agency, so he's no longer an active farmer, and he's not getting the subsidies anymore. Now, if we combine their income, their economic income, with their subsidies, then we see that B is not even making a profit. That's the reason he had to go back. The conventional ones, being A and D, they are the ones with the highest profit margin, and the regenerative, the small one and the big one and the big organic, yeah, they have a minimum profit margin because it remains difficult in function of economic and weather conditions to have a steady income on a year-by-year basis. What is the conclusion of this? But first of all, the farmer who wants to make a profit should still go for conventional. And those who do most of the effort towards nature and climate are actually not rewarded for it. So if you're speaking about the next CAP reform and we are looking at the vision for nature, for agriculture, it should not be about those who need it the most, but it should go about those who deserve it the most. That's where the money should go to. And if we want to finance the transition towards environmental farming using the available money at the moment, and we do that in the most efficient way, it should be used absolutely by those making a real difference. And then the question is, how do you measure that? And let's say we have had within the ILO a number of discussions with Tassos Aniotis on the use of soil as an indicator for this. And I think it's an ideal way because your soil is as well at the basis of your productivity as it is at the basis of your sustainability. So ladies and gentlemen, it's not about small farms, it's not about big farms. Can we please forget that discussion? It is absolutely about those who want to implement sustainability and those who really want to make a difference. Thank you.
A very well illustrated point there, Jürgen. But my next question, and I like how you, I attended an event on the 6th of February, and that was your exact question on the basis of the vision and direct income support. And in the vision, I suppose it's worded that it should be targeted at those that need it most. And your question was, should it not be targeted at those that deserve it most? But my question to you then, Jürgen, in response, is where we understand very clearly that there's a strain now on the community budget, that there's a lot of pressure on the Common Agricultural Policy budget. More details will emerge in June or July when the MFF, the Multi-Annual Financial Framework, goes on the table. So where is this money going to come from? We accept that the cap will be squeezed. Your colleagues on the panel have spoken about private incentives, public-private partnerships. What sort of innovative tools can you foresee in bridging that gap?
Yeah, but let's say the real question is not about how much money is available. Let's say whether there is a lot, let's say farmers will of course prefer that there is a lot of money available, but even if it would be less, and I think that the chances that it is going to be less are rather high, but it is about how we are using that money. And let's say we are making use of a number of systems where we are trying to provide money to those, as described, who need it the most. It's unclear who is needing the most of that money, because I'm very sorry, if a big company is cutting itself in 20 small ones, it's getting 20 times subsidies today, while if it remains a big one, that's not the case. So it's about if you have money, whether it's a lot or it's not, it's less than a lot, you have to make sure that you make sure that the money goes to those who are really investing and those who are capable of delivering results in the field of sustainability. And we do not see that enough in the present way that we are distributing subsidies.
Could I just ask for a reaction perhaps from the latter end of the panel? Jörg Andreas, this is a fairly fundamental question in the Vision for the Future of Agriculture and Food that was published on February 19th. What's your response to Jürgen's display?
Yeah, I agree to that what Jürgen is explaining. I mean, the aspect of neediness is a bridge to kind of agricultural social politics. And I mean, that is more in the responsibility of the member states. I mean, in Germany, we have fundings for the health system and the retirement system of farmers, since it's not coming from the farms. And so this kind of neediness shouldn't be part of the cap. And what we want to see is really that we change the payments from, in the first pillar, the direct payments, really in the result-based payments, with investments and with the payments for ecosystem services from our point of view. So yeah, I agree to that.
Okay, Morgan?
Yeah, I wanted to react to 2 points you were making about the resources. There might be two options that we could explore. The first one is, if we look at other sectors, one possibility would be to use to proceed of a carbon tax in a specific sector to support the decarbonation of that sector. And as far as agriculture is concerned, there is an experiment in Denmark, as far as I know, where there is a carbon tax which is being levied and being reinjected into the sector so that you support the sector using the proceeds that you get from that sector. The other option, indeed, is potentially those biodiversity credits, which it's a bit of a philosophical question, but gives a price to nature, a price to biodiversity, which is difficult to measure, but at least it gives a value, a financial value to something that is being used as an input in the production. So it's understood that the EU will prepare a proposal on this, which is good. Now the question is, it's always the same kind of balance between integrity and ability to scale up funding. You want to make sure the framework is going to be there, robust, preserve integrity, will not give rise to greenwashing, etc. But if you're too strict, on the other hand, you may not raise that much money. So this is always the question of trade-off and balance between the two necessities, which is not that easy to determine.
Thank you for that, Margot. And as you say, that concept of nature credits was also floated in the vision, and that's something that we'll be discussing in due time later on this afternoon. Felipe, I might just come to yourself about bridging that gap. You talked about the financing gap, and as I understand it, it's estimated at around 62 billion in 2022 alone for the agri-food sector. I think there's a lot of stakeholders putting their faith in the likes of the European Investment Bank and looking to your institution saying, well, we need a piece of that pie. What sort of message do you have for those stakeholders here today?
Yes, I mean the 62 billion is about the farmers, so farming,
Sure.
The financing gap there. If you include the value chain, which is also very important to the farmers, only in Europe we had made an assessment of around 96 billion. And globally, the IFPRI has estimated around 390 billion. So what I think is very clear is that this cannot be supported by public budget alone. So we need to be smart in terms of deploying the public budget to those activities that really cannot pay back. I mean, there are a number of activities where you really have to support this activity, but then you need to also use this public budget smartly to really enhance and leverage on private financing to be able to increase the firepower of this. With the guarantee of €1, you can mobilize around €5 in the agricultural sector. So this is one very important area. And this needs to then be also complemented by smart policy. I mean, there has been a lot of discussion this morning that there needs to be a business case for farmers to invest in sustainability. Yeah? So there needs to be a market. And this can come from conscious consumers that are able to pay more. And there are a number of carbon farming schemes and eco-sustainability schemes where consumers are paying for more. I mean, organic farming is one, but then we are seeing in the supermarkets that there is also an enhanced focus of that. But there is also the possibility of policymakers to really create markets through enhanced taxes to realize really the negative externalities, or through regulation creating markets. And from the EIB, we are in this business, and we have quite some experience already, and it can be put up to scale, as you were saying, on financing innovation, so alternative food systems, for example, more conscious animal rearing processes, etc. So to really mobilize this together with additional risk-taking to help farmers to really exact these investments that are associated with enhanced climate risk and other elements.
Thank you for that, Felipe. Jean-Marc, I see you nodding there, particularly on the private incentives and the idea of public-private partnerships. Do you have something to chime in with there?
Yes, so going to Jürgen's table there, I think actually we need all of these guys, right? We need the large ones that can produce at scale. We need the small one that can do, you know, the better organic, the more nutritious organic product, and we need the ones who really are working with the soil. And I think we have to be careful not to finger point in saying, you know, this one's good, this one's bad. We need them all, but we need all of them to sort of change incrementally. And that's where, so I agree, we need to design the incentive system to get the outcomes we want. But in the end, economics has to catch up. Mm-hmm. In the end, this has to make sense for each of them to take those steps. The incentives, I think, are essential. They are the ones that are going to help do the transformation. But complexity is your enemy there, because designing them well is very difficult. We can all do it here on stage, but to the farmer, this is a wall of bureaucracy. You said it. Yeah. You said it before coming to them, and we need simple ways again to be able to deploy this at scale. Digital information sharing, digitalization at the farm level will help there, but keep it simple. That's my plea.
Sure, that's your key message today, Jean-Marc. That's certainly, I think, the direction of travel with the current mandate of the European Commission. I'm going to throw it out now to the floor, ladies and gentlemen. Does anyone have a question for my panelists? Here, right over there. Can we get a microphone right over here, please? Just maybe introduce yourself and say to whom the question is addressed.
Good morning. I'm Emilio Navarro from Spain, Friends of the Countryside. This is a question for all panelists. I've been in several congresses lately about agri-food commodities, and I'm a farmer myself in southern Spain. Everybody is struggling across Europe to make the profitability sustainable. Not to sustain the environment, etc., but to make a living out of agriculture. In my point of view, European Union is over-regulated. And according to the geostrategic gurus I've seen lately, the two big blocks in the world, new, let's say, future, US, China, perhaps the BRICS, and Europe is somewhere there, and not so much regulated. Do you think that should we go in this direction, or should we deregulate a little bit our agriculture, agri-food systems in order to make our farms sustain their profitability? Many thanks.
Who'd like to take that one? Jörg Andreas and Jürgen, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, that is really, a tough and a complex question. I mean, first thing, you are right. If complexity is too high, then it's not working on the ground. Second thing is the circumstances in the different EU member states are very, very far away from each other. So Scandinavian agriculture is completely different to German, and German to the agriculture in your region. And from my point of perspective, to have a strong idea, a shared vision at the European level, what has to be the outcome, the result, which kind of sustainability do we want to have in the balance between ecological and economical questions and social questions, that is maybe the framework then for organizing the agricultural politics and the programs a little bit more in the member states itself. So to bring it a little bit closer to the ground so that you don't come up with a system which is working in Spain but not in Germany and so on. But I mean, yeah, it is tough and complex, and I wouldn't say that we have the freedom to just deregulate. I mean, we live in a very, comparable to others, in a very dense populated small continent. And we have our nature and our ecological system under really huge pressure, maybe a little bit more pressure than other regions of the world at the moment. So we have to be very careful, otherwise we will be hit by climate change and the ecological crisis in the near future very hard, and then the business case for food production and farms is disappearing. So a little bit development of the way of the European Union and changes, yes, but no deregulation.
Okay, Jürgen, you wanted to jump in there?
Well, I do not agree. Finally, a disagreement on stage. I do think we can deregulate. And I would like to compare the situation with someone buying a new car. You go to the garage, you buy a new car, and you're not only getting the car, but there are 3 people sitting in the car. And as soon as you say, I'm starting the car, the second one says, checked, you started the car. And the one in the back says, I'm checking the first one, that he checked you, that you started the car. And the fourth one is doing it on the third one, who did it on the second, who did it on the first. That is the actual situation today in farming. We have a whole list of people who are checking things that are in reality already checked along the chain. And there we can really make things much more simplified. Today, a farmer, a farmer is working 7 days. Out of those 7 days, he's spending 3 days behind its desk. We go from a John Deere to a John Desk in a very short time.
But then I'm a little bit disappointed, since that is not really a disagreement.
Okay,
I mean, for me, that is the ongoing development, and I mentioned before that we have to get less bureaucratic systems. So, I mean, for that is really, but deregulation in a sense that everybody can do what he wants or she wants, that's not working in Europe.
No,
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. We might take that discussion over lunch, if I may intervene. I'm just going to go to a question that just came online from an online viewer, Anne Finnegan from Finnegan Consulting. If I know Anne myself, she's an Agrifax subscriber, and she's coming to us from the northwest coast of Ireland in Rossnowla, County Donegal. And her question is, what is the panel's view on the use of carbon credits and nature financing to finance the transition in agriculture? Now, we touched upon this briefly. Maybe Morgane, you might come in there. This idea, you mentioned nature, or one of you, perhaps it was yourself, mentioned the nature credits. What's your view on the use of those tokens, let's say, in financing that transition?
You could also jump in, Jean-Marc, I think. But
Sure.
I mean, it's a complicated question. We could do a whole panel on
just that topic, right?
I mean, you probably have to distinguish between voluntary carbon markets and carbon tax. And in the case of the EU, we move towards carbon tax. So I think when you have a carbon tax system, what you should discuss in how and following which conditions you can extend that carbon tax to the agricultural system. Using voluntary carbon markets, I'm not personal view here, I'm not completely sure this is really what would help the EU agriculture transitioning, but happy to discuss and be challenged on this.
How about Felipe and Jean-Marc? Is that your area of expertise, these idea of credits, carbon credits, nature credits? What's your opinion, Felipe?
We at the EIB, we are following up also together with the Commission very, very closely the carbon markets and also the biodiversity market and payment for ecosystem services. If you believe about it, I mean, before there was the question about sustained profitability. If a farmer or a forester, for example, a forester gets 95% of his revenues from logging, there's where he will put the focus. If he gets 50% from carbon credits and 50% from logging, then he will also put the focus on other measures that actually incentivize and enhance the carbon credit generation possibility. So this is what I was mentioning before, that we need to create a business case for environment. And the carbon credits in all its forms, so there's land management practice payments, direct sales by farmers to their environment because they have perceived sustainability advantages, due closeness. There's farm level incentives, of course, through the policy makers as well, but also through communities. So a wealth of options there that really can target to enhance the profitability of farmers and diversify their revenue streams. And this is exactly what is highlighted in the vision, which I think is a very, very interesting and very good document.
As you say, innovative sources and diversification of income. Last word to yourself, Jean-Marc, and then we'll wrap it up because I'm conscious people are looking forward to their lunch. So Jean-Marc, in response to this question from Anne Finnegan.
Yes, I think it could be an interesting avenue, and actually, I think together with the EIB in Ukraine, we did finance a carbon credit transaction with a large agro-industrial company there. I think that can be part of the answer of, what are the revenues you can generate, not just for the transition, but sustainably for what you do. The difficulty there is measuring exactly what you sell. And there's the risk of greenwashing or selling something you believe is real, but you later find actually it's less real than we thought is.
And who would do the monitoring then? Who would do the control and the monitoring?
And so
that's
again,
another question.
careful there.
Careful, tread carefully. Well, gentlemen, I think we'll wrap it up there, and we're right then on the nose for having our lunch. So Felipe, Jean-Marc, Morgan, Jörg Andreas, and Jürgen Tack at the end. Please give my panelists a very warm round of applause.